Welcome, listeners, to Let's Talk Some Dirt, your go-to destination for all things green, vibrant, and blossoming. I'm Judy, your companion on this journey through the enchanting world of gardening and your favorite horticulture agent. As your horticulture agent, I've had the pleasure of tending to gardens of all shapes and sizes, and I'm thrilled to bring my expertise to the airwaves to help you cultivate your own slice of paradise. Whether you're a seasoned garden thumb or just starting to dip your toes into the soil, this show is your fertile ground for learning, sharing, and cultivating your passion for gardening. Each episode will dig deep into a variety of topics, from plant care tips, tricks, and sustainable gardening practices, and everything in between. So grab your gardening gloves and join me as we embark on an odyssey of growth and discovery. But this show just isn't about soil and seeds, it's about community. So I encourage you to email us at mgardner@flaglercounty.gov with your questions, share your stories, and connect with fellow gardeners. Whether you have a sprawling backyard, a cozy urban balcony oasis, or a simple of few potted houseplants on your windowsill, Let's Talk Some Dirt is here to inspire, educate, and empower you on your gardening journey. So stay tuned and let's dig in together on Let's Talk Some Dirt. So today I have with me Dr. Liz Felter. She's back at it again. This is her third episode with us. Dr. Felter, you know the routine.
Yes, thanks for having me back. I am Liz Felter, University of Florida Extension Service. I am a regional specialized agent for food systems and production horticulture. I'm based in Apopka, the second largest production area for the nursery industry in the state of Florida.
Wow. So every guest that comes on here, I ask them two questions. What's your favorite plant and why? And which plant best represents who you are as a person? So this is your third time.
Yeah, and you're making me become a different plant.
Yeah, you can't do what you did before.
I think one of my favorite plants actually is called the lady palm. It's another one that you can have a really beautiful, rich, dark green, more of a taller columnar shape. And it will do really, really well in low light. And again, because of that, you don't have to water it constantly. So I really do like that. It's a lady palm, or botanically speaking, it's a rapis palm, RHAPIS. And that's a really cool one. And then maybe I'd like to be a ficus alihi because it's from Hawaii.
Ooh.
Maybe that's the one that represents me.
I love Hawaii.
Yeah, yes. And this is a beautiful ficus tree that probably came on the scene 25 or 30 years ago, and it's turned out to be a really good addition to the interior landscape plant industry as well as homeowners. So I
love that.
I think that's a good thing. So,
when you first came on here, we talked about houseplants. And for those of you that don't know, Dr. Felter came here the first time, and we talked about houseplants. And we never really got to finish that, and I want to go back to that. Can you give a recap for those who about what we talked about the first time around?
Yes, we definitely chatted about how important it is to know what your light is in a setting, so that you can pick a plant that will more likely succeed in those light conditions. And so that's the number one factor in choosing a plant for in your home. And we talked about the fact that, folks tend to overwater inside. And the thing about being inside is they're not going to seriously grow a lot. They're just going to maintain. And the plant is not going to be needing water. In the nurseries, they grow them and they water almost every single day, but they're growing in optimum light and optimum humidity. When you bring them home, they're not going to do that. So they're not going to use that water up as much. And so that's two things we talked about. And then, if you overwater, then you get fungus gnats, and they're annoying because they're in your eyes, they're in your nose, they're in your ears. They just are just annoying. And so we don't want to do that. So those were a couple of things we talked about, and those are truly normal conditions that most folks will face at some point. Mm-hmm. So, and then we mentioned some of our favorite, my seriously favorite plants, but we today want to continue with some other choices so that everybody has more choices to pick from. So that means they will have to go back to part 1 and listen to that podcast.
Please. I love it. So, can you tell us about some house plants that you added into your collection since the last episode?
Yeah, so there's quite a few they're very different than what our first show was about. So there's a plant called an Areca, Areca palm. A lot of people call it the wedding palm because there's plenty of them and they're easily either purchased or rented, right? And, they'll put them in a wedding reception hall to kind of brighten up the space. And so those guys are readily available. I will say I find that they like to have like a medium light. And it's kind of funny, if you put them in too much light, they won't be green. They'll go to a more yellowish green or yellow color. And that's how you know it's definitely in too high a light. So I think that's an option for some folks. Has more of a, fountain-shaped leaves. It's going to be a little bit taller, maybe 3 or 4 feet tall. So something like that maybe looks great in a screened-in pool area, screened-in porch, and would do really well. And then we've mentioned my other plant that I love, and that's that lady palm or the rhapis palm. That one does incredibly good in low light. Nice dark green color. More of what I call a fan shape or hand shape frond versus the fountain look. And just a lot of fun to use those. Now, a lot of people, again, we also talked about when you get tired of your plant, you should not just throw it outside because things become invasive.
Yes.
And we are still going to talk about that always because it's important. The rhapis palm, I find, has little underground runners. So if you're going to put it outside, you're going to want to keep it contained either in like, how some homes have the built-in planter box or something like that. It's usually ground level. Something like that will keep it from taking off in the whole yard. Mm-hmm. And that's really a nice option. And then back to my other one, Ficus alihi, which is spelled A-L-I-I, which is kind of Hawaiian in its own right. Very unique and different-looking ficus tree. Again, a columnar shape, doesn't have the large weeping canopy, but just a beautiful dark green strap-like leaf, a lot longer and thinner than the cousin that it has in a Ficus benjamina or a weeping ficus. Beautiful does well in a medium and a high, and a medium and a low light. So I think that makes it quite easily for people to be successful. And then we talked about golden pothos the last time, and that's the one you definitely don't want to throw outside.
No.
But here's another one you don't want to throw outside. It's called arrowhead leaf or syngonium. Beautiful plant, has multiple colors and varieties out there. Probably better in a medium to highish light. But again, this is a beautiful little plant that does not want to be put outside.
Yes. I do know, like, kind of going back to house plants, they're technically invasive outdoors.
And there's quite, like, pothos is on that list. The syngonium is there. There's a plant called English ivy, which comes in a hanging pot. That's there. However, there are other ivies that are for outside. So I don't want people to get confused on that, right? There's the variegated Algerian ivy. It's a green and white leaf that's beautiful outside, low ground cover. And then it has its cousin who's a dark solid green. But the leaves are much bigger. And definitely this is an outdoor plant and does not have the invasive species label.
What happens? What are some characteristics or some things that you've noticed with some of these house plants that are put outside, not in containers, just growing?
Yeah, so what I find, a lot of people get tired of their dish garden and they throw the whole dish garden outside, and then something in there takes root, right? And so the syngoniums and the pothos are sometimes members of that grouping, right? And then the thing about being invasive is that it takes off and takes control, right? Yeah. It'll spread over a large area and then just start taking over the ecosystem that it's thrown into, and then that gets out of balance. And so we just don't want to contribute to that.
Okay, so what are, we talked about some of the plants that you've added in your collection. What are some house plants that you would recommend?
So I'm going to continue with the fact that I think the next one I'm going to recommend is called a bamboo palm.
I thought bamboos were invasive.
Yeah, but this is not a bamboo.
Okay, so we can work
There's
with
a difference with that. So if you find a plant that has the name bambusa, that is the bamboo that should stay outside. But there are two types. There is the contained one, and then there's the rambling one.
Yeah.
And so, you have to be careful if you're going to do that outside, not to do that. But this is called a bamboo palm. And again, this is common name, bamboo palm. And basically, it does look stalk-like and tall and narrow like a outdoor bamboo. But this one has really pretty leaflets that are more like little fronds on it. And honestly, when I worked in the industry, we would use them so that hotel hallways wouldn't look like bowling alleys, right? Because they're just so long. So we would pair the doors to the convention center with the bamboos, and then you could give directions a lot better to the guests that are looking for, the room. You can have them framed out. So it gives you a really warm feeling to see them. Something else that I love, but is a little dangerous, is that there's a dwarf pygmy date palm, but they have really long thorns.
Ooh.
So you have to be careful, if you're going to use one. A lot of people will use them in a screened-in pool area because they stay smaller. They usually sell them in 2 or 3 multiple trunk type plants, and so they have a little character. And they also have that beautiful frond-like fountain shape frond. So it's pretty, and it's a darker green, has a little more delicate, lacy look. But again, you got to be careful about those thorns.
So when taking care of that plant, would you water it every other week, or what?
On the bamboo or on the pygmy date?
Both.
Okay. So the bamboo is probably a once every 2 weeks.
Okay.
And then the pygmy date is outside. Once they're established, you normally, they're coming through, the rain will come through a screen, and you're usually in a pretty good spot. Mm-hmm. Now, we're in the dry spell now because we're in that March and April time. That might need a little bit of supplemental water at that point. So a couple other thoughts that we have talked about, and I'm only bringing this up. It's called a rubber plant. It's also in the ficus tree family, but a whole different game. It is a burgundy colored leaf.
They're beautiful.
Really large, kind of pinkish look. They definitely like higher light. Don't want to overwater them because they definitely are sensitive to that. But a super cool looking plant, and there's a lot of them around. They're easily found, and it gives you this beautiful different color with the burgundy versus a green, right? It's super fun. And then we talked about our mums and our Chinese evergreens the last time, but I still really like both of those.
I love mums.
Yeah, they do a really good job. Now, if you have what I call a large open area or a large corner where you could put a philodendron species in, like a large split leaf or a monstera, they sometimes are called.
Really nice.
And there's some beautiful varieties now that are variegated and have and there's others that are variegated, not just green and white, but have a little pink going on. So there's a large variety of those that are available, and they do a really nice job, but you have to have good space. And that's another point. If you want a plant to last a long time, you might want to know what the mature size of that plant is, which we talk about that for outdoor use too, because they can take over, and in no time you're like, oh, I think I need to move this, right? And that's not something you want to plan on doing if when you put the design in,
So do monsteras grow pretty quickly, or is it slower?
Well, once you bring them inside, I think they're slower.
Oh, wow.
A lot slower. But, they have huge stalks, which we call, the petiole is very large, and then the leaves are large. And then as they mature, some of them get the splits, or little holes in them that are part of their natural growing habit. And then I guess one more I want to talk about is called a Dracaena. And my favorite one is Dracaena marginata. It's a beautiful dark green leaf, but it has a burgundy edge on every one of the little leaflets. And because of their stalk, they hold a lot of water. And again, you don't want to overwater that or you'll rot the stalk. And that one, you can get that one in different sizes. So you could get one that's 4 or 5 feet tall with multiple heads, or you can go with a smaller one that just looks a little more shrub-like. So has a lot of flexibility for you to use it in various places. So
awesome.
I'm hoping that everybody got a little bit more variety from our conversation today.
I hope so too, because there's so many options you can put in your home or in your office of plants. So there should be no reason why you don't have a plant inside of the home. Speaking of having plants in the home, several years ago, my brother was getting into plants, right? So he was bringing, he would go different places to get plants, and he would bring them inside. Whenever he started to have a little bit issues with them, his primary go-to thing was to repot the plant. He would say, "Oh, that's the issue." And I'm like, you just got this plant. It does not need to be repotted yet. So what is your kind of rule of thumb when it comes to when to repot a plant?
I always tell folks if they start seeing a lot of roots come out of the bottom of the pot, or if you see the roots try to come up and over the top of the pot, that might be your hint, you know? So that's one thing I tell everyone. And then I always suggest that you go to a pot that's 2 inches bigger in diameter. So if you have a 10-inch pot, you're going to want to go to a 12, right? Do not think a 4-inch pot should go in a 12. Yeah. That is too much soil for that 4-inch plant to adjust to, and then it's like extra moisture all over. It just can't figure itself out. So, a 4-inch, you would go to a 6 or an 8 even, but you got to be very careful on I think potting soil choices make a difference. You want to get a well-drained soil that doesn't stay too wet, because then you have a tendency of overwatering.
Exactly.
So that's where we are with the repotting, and that's an important question. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, of course. Because so many times people either jump potting sizes, or they don't really know that you can repot the plant, but that does not solve the primary issue.
No, and I would say sometimes the plant might be having a root rot issue, and if you take it out of the pot and you just put it in new soil, you've transferred that fungal problem or that rotting problem into the new soil, so it is never going to come out of that cycle. Mm-hmm. I think the other thing I want to mention is that when you transplant into a clay pot, I always recommend you soak the clay pot in water for 24 hours, because clay is porous, and if you start with a dry pot, it'll suck the moisture right off the root ball of the plant. So you can try to beat that with a little help from the soaking overnight. Mm-hmm. Plastic always holds moisture more. Look for drainage in the bottom of the pot. If it doesn't have drainage, you need to be dumping extra water out of it, right? So it's not sitting in water and getting overwatered that way.
Is there any common indoor plant problems that comes to a point to where that it's not worth saving the plant, or the plant is unsavable and it needs to be tossed?
Yeah, so when a plant gets a virus or a bacterial infection, there's nothing you can do about that. And it's hard to tell what that is. Sometimes you don't know you have that unless you were to really send it off for a test. Some of us are more familiar with that, and you can tell by looking at the plant symptoms, right? That's a problem. And sometimes you get a mealybug infection, which looks like a bunch of little Q-tips with white legs on them. Yeah, sometimes when you get them, it is really costly to get chemicals and spray it every Saturday and then try off. You know what? I look at it this way. For $8, you can go buy a new plant and get rid of the entire problem, because that problem now can jump on your other plants. Yeah. Right? And so sometimes the cost of the chemicals is $16 a bottle. It means every week for 3 weeks in a row, you got to be spraying it so you can kill off all the life cycles of the insect from eggs to adults, right? When, you know what, for $8, you went and got a new one, and it's beautiful.
Speaking of insects.
Yes.
I want you to say this tip, because you said it the first time you came on here about fungus gnats.
Oh, yes. So the fungus gnats are coming because it's too wet, so you want to back off. And a little biological control that I learned a really long time ago is to put a 1/4 inch of building sand on top of the soil, and that will discourage the females from laying their eggs because they really like the soil and they know the sand isn't what they need to be laying eggs in. And so back off on the watering. If that doesn't work, put the little bit of sand down, and then hopefully that will chase them off.
You know, ever since we filmed that episode, I started putting building sand on all my indoor plants.
Did it work?
Yes, yeah. It did work. And I stopped overwatering. And so I know it worked like a charm. If you could design a plant starter kit, what 3 things?
So I personally like clay pots better because they do help you water more evenly. I would say that a well-drained soil and probably a nice pair of pruners.
Ooh.
Okay, because pruners really come in handy when you need to take off old leaves, which are always going to be the older ones will go yellow first, right? Unless it's a ficus and you've moved her 10 inches over and she doesn't like her new location. But the pruners really come in handy because you want to make a nice, clean, sharp cut, which also will help the plant heal, and more likely insects and diseases won't go to that new wound.
Ooh. Also, you guys, don't forget to sanitize your pruners too. So that's important.
Yes, and you can do that with those little alcohol wipes, individual ones. It's easy to do it with that at home, unless you don't mind having a little container with rubbing alcohol in it and a cotton puff or something to wipe it, because if you cut one plant and it has a problem but you don't know it yet, you will now transfer that to anything else you cut after that point.
So let's say, a lot of people come up to me, they say, I have a black thumb, I can't grow anything. You gave us an amazing list of plants. What 2 or 3 plants would you recommend from that list that they start with?
They could start with the Chinese evergreens, which are in variety, color, and different, there are different shades of green on green. Some are green and silver. You got some beautiful choices there. They're usually pretty forgiving. And I love having peace lilies because I think people like the dark green and the white spadix flowers. Those are beautiful. And then again, golden pothos, because, if it can grow in a bar, which is totally dark as a cave, it can live in your house too.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Dr. Felter.
You're welcome.
And that's all the time that we have today on Let's Talk Some Dirt. I hope you enjoyed our deep dive into the world of indoor plants or household plants, and that you're inspired to get your hands dirty and get some plants. But before we wrap up, I want to remind you of some exciting events happening in our local community. Don't forget, at the Flagler County Extension Office, we do have soil and water testing. Plus, we do have a plant clinic that you can come in and we can take a look at your plants or any insects and kind of figure out what's going on with that. Don't forget to stay in tune with our social media channels and our websites for more details on upcoming events. Thank you so much for tuning in today. And remember, whether you're planting seeds or nurturing blooms, the joy of gardening is always in the journey. Until next time, happy gardening.